Happy Friday. It's finally come around. I am looking less fucked than on the late night stream last night, where I was looking particularly shiny, which is good. It's a good start. I'm going to jump into the latest news. There's two stories that I really want to explore here. One is the Northern Ireland Protocol beef between, that's a good pun actually, between Northern Ireland and the UK, Northern Ireland and Britain, I suppose, and Northern Ireland, the UK, and the story of Matt Hancock giving evidence to the Select Committee on the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. So let's get cracking. Actually, let's look at the papers first. What am I talking about? Forgetting the usual format. Apologies, everyone. Okay. As per usual. Thank you very much. So take it easy on this stream. Couldn't really sleep. I woke up about probably 5:30, maybe, something like that. Stared at my phone for a bit. Couldn't really get back to sleep. And so I thought I'll jump on here, get started early. I've got some work to do at around 9. So I'll probably stay on till just before then. But yeah, woke up, felt very groggy. Not like for any particular reason. I didn't wake up with hay fever, which was nice. I don't think I've sneezed once today. So I suppose on the bright side, it's the first day I've woken up without hay fever. Which has been a motherfucker for me for the last couple of weeks. Really bad hay fever this summer. Anyway, we're up now. Let's catch up with the latest. I'm liking the look of some of these already. Brexit is overshadowing the G7 summit. Yeah, so meanwhile, G7's kicked off. And I will look at that. So, bitter standoff over Brexit sours the start of the G7 summit. So this is the story of Northern Ireland and things coming to a head. Look at that picture, lovely stuff. Joe Biden and the First Lady, Boris Johnson, and our First Lady, with all the problems that she brings to the table. Daily Star, Pinocchio. Fantastic. World stunned as politician says he hasn't told fibs. That's genuinely quite funny. Madness, isn't it? Look at that cover. Can you imagine it on any other paper? Not even the sun. Not even the sun. Right, Daily Express PM. Biden is a breath of fresh air. It's kind of a casual implication that he didn't get along with Trump. That's how I would read into that. I feel like it's how the statement is designed. Maybe not. The Mirror. How's he got the nerve to say that? Medics and grieving families fury after Matt Hancock claims there was no kit problem. Which is, yeah, a pretty bold fucking statement. Times. PM ponders 4-week delay before end of curbs. Yeah, so we still don't know. It's meant to, what are we now? The 11th of June. The final unlocking is meant to be on the 21st. I would imagine that this weekend, you'd hope that we would hear something about whether or not it's actually going to be the final unlocking, whether or not that's actually going to go ahead. But then again, you never really know. Talked a lot on here about the India variant and the fact that that is more transmissible. Vaccines may be resistant to it. So, with all that in mind, it's very, very, very hard to say whether or not that last unlocking will go ahead. The government's been the most cautious that we've seen it, really, in terms of its language that it's using. Not really promising anything, not really even giving much hope. And that, I think, is the right thing to do, because it's made the mistake in the past of giving false hope and things have gone to shit when at the last minute, say with Christmas, they then suddenly said, actually, no one can go anywhere, cancel all your Christmas plans. But the fact that they did it at the last minute meant that loads of people had already made their Christmas plans. So millions of people were moving across the country, going to Christmas here, there and everywhere, obviously. Right, anyway. The Sun. Dear lads. Celebrates the beginning of Euro 2020. Yeah, so no politics there. Pfizer jab shortage warning hits hopes for 21st of June. So this is something I don't actually know a lot about, so I'll have to look into that. Let me put a preliminary Google there, just to remind me to check that out. The Daily Mail. Oh baby, what a lovin'. I mean, talk about patriotic bullshit. I don't know. Is there any mention of the actual political crisis going on at the moment in that little bit of text? I doubt it. Everything's going well, as you can see there. It is a good picture. You've got to hand it to them. Someone's done well. May. Global Britain is closed for business. Prime Minister Theresa May warns Britain's travel restrictions are incomprehensible for one of the world's most vaccinated countries. Former Prime Minister Theresa May warns. Well, I mean, is she saying that there's too many travel restrictions? That's kind of a change of tack if she is. She's been quite critical of the fact that the country was unlocking before, I think. Let's take a look at that. We're done with the papers anyway, really. FT. Challenge for Fed as US consumer prices rise at fastest rate since 2008. which is not good. Metro, I didn't lie, PPE never in crisis. God. First ladies hit the beach. That picture will be everywhere. First ladies with a cute kid. Right. Theresa May tells Boris Johnson to level with the public as she slams incomprehensible travel restrictions. Despite the jabs rolled out, Ms May says the UK is reluctant to give its citizens the freedoms those vaccinations should support. So this is definitely a change in tack. Before, I think Theresa May seemed to be criticising the level of caution that was being shown rather than the relaxation, it seemed. So now this is a little bit confusing. Boris Johnson needs to level with the public about what the future of travel will look like and tell them that we will not eradicate coronavirus completely from the UK, Theresa May has said. In a forthright intervention in the Commons, the former Prime Minister said it is... Hey! 548-893. Thank you very much for the follow, mate. Hope you're doing well. Drop me a message in the chat there if you want to tell me where you are and how things are going with you. I'd love to know. Thank you very, very much for the follow. That's made my morning. In a forthright intervention in the Commons, former Prime Minister said it was incomprehensible. There's a good word to use, that. It's definitely Conservative Party language as well. This idea that you couldn't possibly get your head around what's being done here. That the UK, which is one of the most heavily vaccinated countries in the world, which is objectively true, is the nation that is the most reluctant to give its citizens the freedoms those vaccinations should support. And she hit out at the government's approach to international travel during the COVID-19 pandemic. Holidaymakers rush back from Portugal. My chat's gone a bit funny, I can't read that message properly. Let's have a look. Ohio. Nice one. Right. I wonder if you have a take on the whole Biden and Boris Johnson love affair that's happening in the G7 right now. That's the one of the main things that I'm interested in today, is looking to see how your president has applied pressure to our Prime Minister, and rightly so, because our Prime Minister needs a good kick up the arse when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. But hey to you in Montpelier, Ohio, USA. Montpelier, I feel like I'm saying that with more of a French accent than is necessary. Am I wrong? I don't know. Right, I want to see this video of holidaymakers rushing back from Portugal, because I just can't get over the utter shit show that is the UK's travel restrictions and what they make holidaymakers do. This has happened before with France, is the one I remember, where everybody rushed to France to try and get a lovely holiday once things had been relaxed, and then while they were over there, the government said, nope, as soon as you come back to the UK, you've got to be locked in your flats and houses for 2 weeks. So everybody fucking rushed back, obviously, jammed up the airport, jammed up the Eurostar, which creates much more trouble than it's worth, obviously. I haven't caught too much of being Biden and Boris. Yeah. I don't blame you. Well, I'm going to look at it in a bit and we'll see what's going on. It's definitely interesting. I think for me the most interesting thing is this is the first time that they've publicly, publicly had a conversation or any kind of important conversation between them, Biden and Johnson. So let's see. All right, let's see this utter shit show.
Escaping the Algarve has never felt so stressful. This was the last day to get back to the UK before Portugal loses its place on the green list.
I was supposed to be here for 1 month, but I'm having to go home today because of all the rules and regulations back in the UK, which is an absolute joke. Absolute. No need for Portugal to be an amber. No need.
Countless plans have been changed just to get home and avoid a 10-day quarantine.
I absolutely understand why the government's done it, but it's going to affect my holidays going forward, so I'm absolutely devastated for the short term.
It was very stressful because we then had to keep abreast of the news, find out what was going on. The queues for the COVID tests and things were much bigger. So yeah, there was a lot of pandemonium in Portugal.
This isn't, though, just about some summer sunshine in Portugal. The transatlantic airlines have come together to say they simply have to get people flying again, now that the majority of their passengers are fully vaccinated. The aviation bosses here and in the US are demanding that the G7 summit this week clears the way for a green travel corridor across the Atlantic.
We've been closed for over a year now, and that's costing, just in the UK alone, over £23 million every single day. And that's not just about the loss of revenue to our countries. It's also about jobs that are at risk. Hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk.
Just open wide for me. Thank you.
Passengers who want to travel just carry on testing. Every day, this private centre at Liverpool Airport has passengers needing on-site PCR tests after other firms have lost their samples or returned inconclusive results.
There are gaps in the system now because it's not just about fit to fly, it's about 2 and 8 day testing when people come back. Is there the capacity to do that? You know, if we had hundreds of thousands of travellers coming into the country in any one day, then doing 2-day testing, is the capacity genuinely there?
There are so many questions, but at the heart of it is the question that Lisa was asking herself all the way back to Gatwick today.
What's the point of having had the jabs? What's the point of testing regularly like we've been doing for months if you then can't dip your toe into the water and live life again and travel again?
So they headed home again. A British summer does have a lot going for it, but people want to see the world again, and soon. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
Britain's attitude to travel, combined with the fact that now places in Europe like Portugal and like Spain rely so heavily on British money going over, spending money on, package holidays, is a key part of the issues that we're seeing with COVID now, because there's this desperation to get over there as soon as possible from Britain to Spain, from Britain to Portugal, and other places in Europe as well, obviously, to other places in Europe. And our government has never been clear and consistent when it comes to the travel restrictions. Holiday makers get over there, they tell them suddenly once they're over there that they've now got to quarantine when they come back, so they rush back. Another country gets put on the green list, they go over there, it gets put on the amber list or the red list. traffic light system is complete shit. And yeah, it's caused more problems than it's even worth. I'm not really clear on what Theresa May is saying here. So we are falling behind the rest of Europe in our decisions to open up. She told MPs that people will never be able to travel abroad ever again if ministers maintain their stance that it cannot be restarted until there are no new variants of the virus. So it's kind of like, on one hand she's saying this, on the other hand she's saying that. I don't really know where she stands with it. Right, Biden and Johnson. So, actually Macron's also weighed in as well. There's been a few different things to do with Brexit related things, basically, where Macron seems to have watched it for a bit, not really said anything, and then kind of really put his foot down, which is it's always an interesting moment. So Macron warns Johnson, nothing is negotiable over Northern Ireland Protocol. The G7 summit risks being overshadowed by the bitter standoff over Brexit. Risks being overshadowed, I think it's pretty sure that that's what is happening. That's going to be the key takeaway, I think, regardless now. So many eyes on this thing. The French president last night ramped up the pressure on Boris Johnson over the Northern Ireland Protocol by insisting nothing is negotiable, as the G7 summit of world leaders risked being overshadowed by the bitter standoff over Brexit. In a defiant intervention as he prepared to travel to the UK, Emmanuel Macron warned Boris Johnson that France is not open to renegotiating any aspect of the protocol, and even appeared to raise questions about whether the UK could be trusted. So Emmanuel Macron, no fan of Boris Johnson, asked about British demands for aspects of the protocol to be reworked. Macron told journalists at an LEC press conference, I think this is not serious. To want to have another look at something in July that was finalised in December after years of discussions and work. And, everyone who is even a bit familiar with Boris Johnson's political strategies knows that obviously as soon as that deal was signed, he was going to start to backtrack and try and squeeze little extras out of the deal. It's pretty clear. The issue is Northern Ireland and Scotland, England and Wales are separated. Northern Ireland is separated by the sea and connected to the island of Ireland, which is still very much part of the EU. I say very much, it is in the EU. This protocol states that unless there is a trade agreement of some kind between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, processed meat and about 30 other different things can't travel from Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK. Because Northern Ireland is going to follow EU rules. The problem is the UK has now become so Brexit obsessed, and Johnson's government is so flag waving that it can't really be seen to follow any kind of EU rules at all now on anything. It's all about breaking free and taking back control and all that other bullshit. So now we get this. Right, so Macron, We have a protocol, he continued. If after 6 months you say we cannot respect what we negotiated, then that says nothing can be respected. I believe in the weight of a treaty. I believe in taking a serious approach. Nothing is negotiable. Everything is applicable. That's pretty fucking firm. His tough words came as Johnson was forced to play down divisions with US President Joe Biden, calling him a breath of fresh air. After it emerged, the US diplomats had remonstrated with the UK's Brexit negotiator, Lord Frost, about the risk of tensions being inflamed in Northern Ireland. Right, let's take a look at this. So this is PM Boris Johnson after his meeting with Biden.
I don't think it is any exaggeration to say that the relationship between the UK and the US is the relationship between North America and Europe, which really sort of is incarnated in that Atlantic Charter of 1941, which we've renewed today between me and President Biden, is of massive, massive strategic importance for the prosperity, the security of the world, for all the things we believe in together: democracy, human rights, the rule of law. The US and the UK stick up for those two things together. So it's incredibly important that we should affirm that. And the talks were great. They went on for a long time. We covered a huge range of subjects. And it's wonderful to listen to the Biden administration and to Joe Biden, because there's so much that they want to do together with us, from security, NATO, to climate change, and it's fantastic. It's a breath of fresh air. A lot of things they want to do together.
First thoughts. Joe Biden, I feel like it's a very Boris Johnson thing to use presidents and prime ministers' first names. Surely, I mean, I'll say this and now Joe Biden will probably say Boris, but I feel like American politicians say Mr. and President and use formal terms. Maybe that's me being naive. Right, anyway. How's the lighting here? It's okay. Talks on resolving the impasse of the implementation of the protocol collapsed without agreement earlier this week. Well, old Boris doesn't have much respect from me if he sees Biden as a breath of fresh air. What's your take on Biden then? Not a fan? He's expected to join the summit on Friday. Both Downing Street and the White House reaffirmed their commitment to the Good Friday Agreement after the talks, and stressed the need for the standoff to be resolved jointly between the UK and the EU. Yeah, the Good Friday Agreement, and that's where probably the biggest problem lies, and that's the subtext to all of this, and that's what is on everybody's mind. The Good Friday Agreement, incredibly violent time, leading all the way up to the Good Friday Agreement, incredibly violent time in Northern Ireland and Ireland, which is why any kind of political gestures, any kind of trade situation, anything like that, new policies, the Good Friday Agreement is always in the background. Johnson's official spokesperson made clear afterwards that didn't mean the UK was stepping back from the threat of taking unilateral action, such as invoking Article 16 of the agreement to suspend the protocol. We continue to keep all options on the table because time is short, the spokesperson said. What do you think of Biden, Viper? Tell me. EU analysts Jabba Rahman of consultancy Eurasia Group said he now puts a 30% probability on the risk of an EU-UK trade war. That would not be pretty at all. In which he said that EU could retaliate by limiting UK fish exports and even interrupting the UK's electricity supply to Jersey and mainland Great Britain. He said an intervention by the G7 appeared necessary to resolve the situation. All eyes are on Cornwall as the relationship hangs on the precipice. The Prime Minister's spokesperson rejected Macron's comments, saying, "We are absolutely acting in accordance with what was agreed and what was set out." He said the protocol had been agreed in challenging circumstances. I can say that again. And claimed the UK had already made more than 10 proposals for resolving the standoff, and we are yet to hear back. This is exactly what happened with the border in the Irish Sea. We sent over all of these protocols about, crazy ways that we could fix this trade barrier, and nothing happened. He is a paedophile, and the Democrats didn't have anyone else to use for their puppet in the White House. I gotta say, I'm not playing ball on that one. I haven't seen any evidence of the fact that he's a paedophile, I must say. I don't know about that one, mate. Do you want to state what the evidence is, what's come out about that? I'd definitely be interested to know. I haven't even heard of that, I've got to be honest. Our view is the EU continues to prioritise protection of the single market, even though there is very little risk to it. The Prime Minister insisted that discussions with Biden have been very good, though unusually the pair did not hold a joint press conference, instead giving separate statements on camera. That is unusual. Because supposed to have a special relationship, the US and the UK, although the stories come out that supposedly Johnson doesn't like the use of the term special relationship. There's no question that under President Biden, there is a massive amount that the new US administration wants to do together with the UK on everything from security, working together, protecting our values around the world together, but also on climate change, the Prime Minister said. So it's a very big breath of fresh air. There's that term again, that term that you don't like, Viper. It's new, it's interesting, and we're working very hard together. One thing we all absolutely want to do, and that is to uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and make sure that we keep the balance of the peace process going. That's absolutely common ground, and I'm absolutely optimistic that we can do that. Biden was similarly effusive about what he called a very productive meeting, referring in his post-talk comments to the special relationship between the US and the UK, the term of which Johnson is reportedly not a fan, so there you go. Biden said, "We affirmed the special relationship. That is not said lightly. The special relationship between our people and renewed our commitment to defending the enduring democratic values that both our nations share." The pair exchanged gifts, with Biden giving Johnson a US-made bike. That's a pretty good gift. Johnson likes to cycle whenever the cameras are on him, and the Prime Minister giving him a picture of the abolitionist Frederick Douglass from an Edinburgh mural. That's an interesting one. Oh, just dig and you will. There is nothing mainstream and not many truthers left on YouTube, but about 6 years ago you could find a lot. We call him Sniffy Joe because he likes to smell little girls' hair. You see, I remember the videos of him sniffing people. I do remember that. I don't know how far that rabbit hole goes, but I do remember seeing that. Yeah. And obviously the Trump administration were all over that shit. For sure. Alright, earlier, Charles Michel, President of the European Council, who will meet Johnson in Cornwall alongside Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, said it was paramount to implement what we have decided over Northern Ireland. Johnson and Biden were all smiles as they greeted each other on camera before their talks, the location of which had to be moved to the conference hotel from St. Michael's Mount, just off the Cornish coast, because of poor weather. When Biden said the pair had both married above our station, that's a great comment, Johnson replied, "I'm not going to disagree with the president on that or anything else." They are both politicians that rely on banter and making jokes, for sure. And they're both men of a different era, should I say. Biden because he is so old, and Johnson because he is so Etonian. It is as deep as the deep state that really runs America. You're getting into conspiracy territory now. I'm way out of my depth on that one, I've got to admit, Viper. I see where you're coming from, I do. But I don't know. What's going on? Who knows? All I know is what's reported by qualified journalists, unfortunately. While Brexit does not formally feature on the formal agenda, with Johnson telling Atlantic magazine recently, "We've sucked that lemon dry." God, the US is concerned about Frost's tactics over the implementation of post-Brexit border checks in Northern Ireland. It's me pouring a coffee, by the way, not just pissing off camera. Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had hammered home Washington's message on the way to London on Thursday, telling journalists, "Any steps that imperil or undermine the Good Friday Agreement will not be welcomed by the US." Labour's Louise Haigh, the shadow Northern Ireland secretary, said, "It is worrying on the eve of such an important summit that Boris Johnson's actions are isolating Britain from our strongest allies. The Prime Minister personally negotiated the protocol, so has a responsibility to make it work and protect the precious Good Friday Agreement. Other G7 leaders arrive tomorrow, and Johnson will hold bilateral meetings with his counterparts from Japan, Canada, and Italy. The leaders will hold their first formal summit session in the afternoon, covering the recovery from the COVID pandemic, before meeting the Queen for a reception at the Eden Project." Very interesting. Do you think that there are aliens? That's my question. Do international governments know of the existence of aliens? And if so, when will we know about the existence of aliens? Right. Yeah, so this is Joe Biden's own personal. I remember reading that he was personally invested in this particular issue. Joe Biden's commitment to defending the Good Friday Agreement is baked into his political history and identity. I'm just going to skim this one, just to give us a bit of background. Rare issue of bipartisan consensus in an otherwise hyper-polarised political scene. Biden's emotional attachment to Ireland has been a constant throughout his adult life and has become part of his political identity too. Right, he routinely refers to his mother's family history and his ties to County Mayo. He quotes Irish poets and uses the example of British rule in Ireland as a bridge to empathise with persecuted minorities. After he won the election in November, the BBC's Nick Bryan asked if he had a quick word for the British broadcaster. The BBC? The president replied, "I'm Irish." Now that says a lot about Biden's attitude towards Britain as a whole. It's going to be a fucking interesting 4 years. At his first full press conference as president, he recalled that his great-grandfather had been forced to leave Ireland because of what the Brits had been doing. That's a quote, because of what the Brits had been doing. He's not wrong. He's not wrong at all. And that says a lot about how he's going to handle this situation. In other Biden news, Biden warns Russia against harmful activities at the start of first official trip. So US President Joe Biden has launched his first official overseas trip with a warning to Russia. Sorry, bear with me. Bear with me just 1 second. The warning to Russia that it faces robust and meaningful consequences if it engages in harmful activities. Mr. Biden made clear his intention to strengthen ties with US allies following strained relationships under the Trump administration. He arrived in the UK on Wednesday. He'll meet PM Boris Johnson to agree a new Atlantic Charter. The pact will be a modern version of the one agreed between Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt in 1941. There's so much historical, emotional bullshit surrounding this one, with a focus on challenges including climate change and security. BBC's political editor Laura Koonsberg says the two are aiming to refresh a vital relationship after the turbulence of the Trump years and the pressures of the pandemic. At the end of his trip, Mr. Biden is due to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva. White House has indicated that he intends to cover a full range of pressing issues with his Russian counterpart, including arms control, arms control, climate change, Russian military involvement in Ukraine, Russia's cyber hacking activities, and the jailing of Russian dissident Alexei Navalny. I'm plugged in. Yes, I'm plugged in. I can say that again. Yeah, Navalny situation is fucking crazy in itself. And Biden will definitely have a word or two about that, I'm sure. And it's going to be a bit like that bit in House of Cards where Frank Underwood goes to meet, I can't remember what the name of the Russian president is in that show now. God, what's his name? It doesn't matter. Anyway, whatever version of Putin is in that show, because he's jailed a gay bloke. This is obviously different, but kind of similar in a way, right? Kind of. So before I move on to Matt Hancock bearing his soul, let's have a look at a few of the things going on. Alright, Cummings, the ongoing Cummings crisis. Still, I reckon, for my money, probably the biggest threat to Johnson's reputation. I don't think it's over yet. I hope it's not over yet, because someone's got to tell us what the fuck was happening in there. The government's certainly not going to do it without being dragged by wild horses into a courtroom. Dominic Cummings promises number 10 revelations in paid-for newsletter. PM's former top aide to offer some Substack posts for free and charge for access to extra features such as Q&A sessions. This is fucking insane. Dominic Cummings is planning to publish a paid-for newsletter in which subscribers can learn about his time at Inside Downing Street. Boris Johnson's former top aide has launched a profile on Substack, a platform that allows people to sign up to newsletter mailing lists. In a post on the site, Cummings said he would be giving out information on the coronavirus pandemic for free, as well as some details of his time at Downing Street. However, revelations about more reconciled stuff on the media, Westminster, Inside Number 10, how did we get Brexit done in 2019, 2019 election, etc., etc., will be available only to those who pay £10 a month for a subscription. Tenner a month, more than Netflix, to read the words of Dominic Cummings. You couldn't make it up. Subscribers will also be able to access, it's not just the articles, I do apologise, undersold it. Subscribers will also be able to access extra features such as question and answer sessions. I'm giving a bit of a plug for Cummings' thing here, I'm aware. Subscribers will find out first about new projects that I make public, the post said. Only subscribers can comment. He said he also intended to use the platform to campaign for answers over the COVID pandemic and the government's handling of it. Right, this is what I wanted, Viper. Well, they have known for centuries we are not the only beings of existence, but from what I've learned, they don't feel people can handle the truth. There was a hacker who got into info on aliens. He was from the UK, I believe. And he says they have evidence for sure. There is a conspiracy right now that they are going to use an alien invasion of Americans. To do what? What's the invasion going to be for? What's the goal? That is interesting. Cummings confirmed the launch of the platform on his Twitter account, urging campaigners pushing for an immediate COVID inquiry to get in touch, as he would help campaign for free. So Cummings is going to help push forward this COVID inquiry, which is good, because it needs some weight behind it. The government's going to do everything it can to make it the least public, shortest and furthest away public inquiry into how it's handled COVID that it can. He said one of the situations he might be able to help in is if you want to win an election, or you want to predict something that you don't know how. Fucking crazy. My goodness. He's a hired gun. Everyone's got to eat. Users can get some access without charge, but then can pay £100 a year, £10 a month, or £200 a year to become a founding member. It follows Cummings taking aim at Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, and the government in general as part of evidence given last month to the Health and Social Care Select Committee. I'm going to see if I can find some kind of highlights reel of that for you, so we can look back on that. That would be quite interesting. I don't remember the why at the moment, but I will dig and tell you next time. Yeah, please do, definitely. Be interested to hear that. Cummings highlights. That should do it. That should do it. Yeah, here we are. Yeah, cheeky few-minute highlight reel. See how we go. This is one of the more interesting days in politics we've had this year. This committee meeting 2 weeks ago. I certainly enjoyed broadcasting it live here. Oh, bloody hell. We're in a bit slow there, folks. Apologies. We'll get there. We'll get there. Area 51, I remember that debacle. People charging towards Area 51. What's in there?
The government itself, and number 10,
saw that.
was
Absolute shit show. I don't know why we're running so slow. I tell you, really upgraded my internet and everything recently.
was not operating on a war footing in February on this in any way, shape or form. Lots of key people were literally skiing in the middle of February. In February, the Prime Minister regarded this as just a scare story. He described it as the new swine flu.
Did you tell him it wasn't?
Certainly. On the 14th, we said to the Prime Minister, you are going to have to lock down. But there is no lockdown plan. It doesn't exist. SAGE haven't modelled it. DH don't have a plan. We are going to have to figure out and hack together a lockdown plan. This is like a scene from Independence Day with Jeff Goldblum saying the aliens are here and your whole plan is broken and you need a new plan, right? That is what the scene was like that morning with Ben Warner in the Jeff Goldblum role. He took the Prime Minister through all the graphs and through the NHS graphs and showed him people performed far disastrously below the standards which the country has a right to expect. I think that the Secretary of State for Health is certainly one of those people. I said repeatedly to the Prime Minister that he should be fired. So did the Cabinet Secretary, so did many other senior people. The procurement system with which they were operating was just completely hopeless. We were told at the Cabinet table by officials that the Department of Health had been turning down ventilators because the price had been marked up. I mean, it's sort of it's completely beggars belief that that sort of thing was happening. When I was having PPE meetings around the Cabinet room table, we were told, oh, well, the PPE won't arrive, this obviously is not going to arrive for months. Well, why is it not going to arrive for months? Well, because it takes that long to ship. Why are you shipping it? Well, we ship it because that's what we always do. But hang on, we're going to have a peak in the NHS around about mid-April, and you're shipping things from China that are going to arrive in months' time, and all the airplanes are not flying. Leave this meeting, commandeer the planes, fly them to China, drop them at the nearest airfield, pick up our stuff, fly it back. At this point, we had Trump sending the CIA around trying to gazump everybody on PPE. There's a very profound question about the nature of our political system that means that we got at the last election a choice between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. I think any system which ends up giving a choice between two people like that as the people to lead is obviously a system that's gone extremely badly wrong. There's so many thousands and thousands of wonderful people in this country who could provide better leadership than either of those two, and there's obviously something terribly wrong with the political parties if that's the best that they can do. It's also the case that I don't exclude myself from this. Like, in any sensible, rational government, it is completely crazy that I should have been in such a senior position, in my personal opinion. I'm not smart. I've not built great things in the world. It's completely crackers that someone like me should have been in there, just the same as it's crackers that Boris Johnson was in there.
Fucking madness. I mean, that is just pure fucking comedy. I haven't heard that particular line before. Let's have that one again. That last line I haven't actually heard before.
We got at the last election a choice between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris. Dump everybody on PPE. There's a very profound question.
This is actually, I'm not a Dominic Cummings fan, who is, but this particular line is actually very, very fucking, it's true, but it's also very switched on.
Dump everybody on PPE. There's a very profound question about the nature of our political system that means that we got at the last election a choice between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. I think any system which ends up giving a choice between two people like that as the people to lead is obviously a system that's gone extremely badly wrong. There's so many thousands and thousands of wonderful people in this country who could provide better leadership than either of those two, and there's obviously something terribly wrong with the political parties if that's the best that they can do. It's also the case that I don't exclude myself from this. Like, in any sensible, rational government, it is completely crazy that I should have been in such a senior position, in my personal opinion. I'm not smart. I've not built great things in the world. It's completely crackers that someone like me should have been in there, just the same as it's crackers that Boris Johnson was in there.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that quote before, and I hadn't heard him say anything so obviously bad about Boris Johnson before either. I know Viper, it's hilarious, and this UK's political system is an absolute fucking joke. Like, I think I read somewhere once that somebody did a study about the amount of hoops that someone of my skin colour would need to jump through to get to the level of Prime Minister is unfathomable. The chances are so far beyond. It's a system of friends in private schooling, in the most elite schooling in the country, and from the most elite families in the country. It's a boys' club, system of government, and he's right to say, you know, that someone like him, with no real qualifications to be in his position, should be in his position. It shouldn't have happened, for sure. He's absolutely right to say that. But yeah, I've never seen him say something so explicitly negative about Johnson before. And God knows he wouldn't have got that fucking job if he'd have said that about Johnson before. And crazy. Right, I think it's about time to actually let's have a quick look at this COVID rules issue. I want to see who's urging Johnson to keep the rules in place and whether the voices are big enough. If the right person says it, the right amount of people or right person says to keep the rules in place, he'll probably go through it. It's quite hard to get a sense of what the public thinks about there being more restrictions. So he doesn't really have that to rely on. Previously, he would have tested out the mood. But for this, I think he's kind of got to make a decision, which Johnson isn't very good at doing, obviously. So here's McManus, the Vice President of the Associate of Directors of Public Health. Yeah, reasonably big name. Yeah, so this is the key point, isn't it? Johnson has repeatedly said he sees nothing in the data to suggest the final stage of unlocking on 21st June needs to be delayed, though The Guardian revealed this week that the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was willing to accept a short delay if necessary. So, how did that come out again? Sunak could accept a 4-week delay to ending restrictions. I wonder how that got out. So former Tory Minister Steve Baker. You see, twats like Steve Baker are the problem. The Boys Club is here also. They know years in advance who will go into office. That's why Trump pissed in their Cheerios when he took office. It wasn't part of the plan. Yeah, Trump was definitely a surprise, to put things one way. Although, of course, remember, Trump was helped into office by Roger Stone, who was, that was very much planned, because he was the same person that helped get Bush into office, and the same person that years before he's worked on Nixon's campaign, I believe, as a teenager, going back to then. He's the fixer who I think has got pardoned, but Trump had his help. Don't forget about that. I don't know how it's come out that Sunak has been fine with a 4-week delay. Where are the sources for that? I'm missing this. Am I not reading something? I feel like I'm missing something here. The source. Where's that source? Whitehall source. Said he was not fixated on the 21st June date, but was more concerned that when restrictions are lifted, the move can be permanent. So that's like a common sense position. Lock down for longer so that you don't have to lock down again. Makes sense in every sense. Yeah, Viper, look at Roger Stone if you haven't heard about him. There's a really good documentary on Netflix called Get Me Roger Stone, which is fantastic, and it's all about Roger Stone's political career. They kind of give him free rein to talk about himself, and he's a bit of a narcissist. He's got a bit of a cult of personality. A lot of people are afraid of him, and a lot of people are kind of hate him, but a lot of people admire him as well in the conservative circles. And he's had a really interesting career, and he's a rule breaker when it comes to political races. I'd recommend watching that. Right, I think it's time to take a look at Hancock giving evidence. So a bit of background on this. Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, has been accused of lying by Dominic Cummings. Been accused of lying about the fact that in social care homes, he at one point said that they were prepared to test everybody, full capacity for testing in care homes. But as a matter of fact, that was never the case, and care homes had, I think, all third of COVID deaths occurred in care homes. He fucked up, basically. So now this is going to be what he's going to be grilled on, for sure. Oh yeah, just quickly, I trust no government official, to be honest. They don't care about the slave labour. I will look into Roger Stone for sure. Yeah, that documentary is brilliant. Probably my favourite political documentary that I've seen. Because they did the smart thing of just letting the guy talk. You know, and it exposes the political system in America in a way that a lot of documentaries have failed to do. Even the likes of kind of Michael Moore have failed to get to those moments in that documentary where you think, wow, the system is quite fucked. So yeah, it is a really good documentary on Netflix. Right, let's jump in. I'm looking forward to seeing Hancock sweat, I've got to admit.
Order, order. The committee is now in session. The Science and Technology Committee and the Health and Social Care Select Committee are conducting a joint inquiry into the lessons that can be learned from the response to the COVID pandemic, and in particular, lessons that can inform further decisions yet to come. And we conclude our oral evidence sessions today with the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock.
By the way, I'm not going to watch 4 hours of this, just to put it out there. I'm going to be stopping and talking and skipping and all the rest of it. So just in case you're worried, I've got to jump off before 9 o'clock anyway. So I've got less than an hour left. So we'll see how we go. I just want to hear some of his answers.
Hancock, pleased to welcome the Secretary of State. As in our last hearing, Jeremy Hunt and I will alternate in the chair, covering 4 themes. The first is the initial response to the pandemic. The second are the lockdown measures, the non-pharmaceutical interventions, as they're so called, and the test and trace system. The third is the development of vaccines. And the fourth, decisions taken in the autumn and winter of 2020-2021 and current policy issues. We'll pause briefly between these sessions to change over in the chair. Now, we took oral evidence from the Prime Minister's former advisor Dominic Cummings on the 26th of May. Mr Cummings agreed at the hearing to provide written evidence to substantiate various verbal claims that Friday the 4th of June, in good time to inform our questions today to the Secretary of State. We have not received that evidence, nor any explanation as to why that has not been available. Now, as Jeremy Hunt and I both said in our last hearing, it's important that if serious allegations are made against an individual, they should be corroborated with evidence, and it must be counted as unproven without it. Now, most of this hearing will be about learning lessons, but I think it's only fair to the Secretary of State for him to be able to have his say about the allegations that have been made against him. So I'm going to begin with some questions drawing on those accusations that have been made. And I want to stress that these are suggestions, allegations that Dominic Cummings has made. They're not the committee's charges to investigate. So the first is, did you ever say anything to the Prime Minister that you knew not to be true?
No.
Thank you. And specifically, in terms of the particular points that Dominic Cummings... Thank you.
That's
did you
a key
ever
question.
Say anything to the Prime Minister?
So basically, did you lie to the Prime Minister?
So the first is, did you ever say anything to the Prime Minister that you knew not to be true?
No.
Thank you. And specifically, in terms of the particular points that Dominic Cummings raised, first, did you say that everyone who needed treatment got the treatment that they required when you'd been told by the Chief Scientific Advisor and the Chief Medical Officer that people did not get the treatment that they deserved?
I did absolutely say, both in private and in public, that everybody got the COVID treatment that they needed. And I'm very proud of the fact that with the NHS, we delivered on that during the pandemic because it was critical. There was no point at which I was advised, and I've taken the trouble to check with the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor, there was no point at which I was advised that people were not getting the treatment they
If you're jumping off, by the way, Viper, thank you very much again for the follow. Really appreciate that, mate.
needed. On the contrary, one of the things that we succeeded in doing through the entire response to this pandemic has been to protect the NHS so that people have always had access to treatment for COVID.
Thank you. The second allegation that was made was that on PPE, personal protective equipment, in April, did you ever say or brief that the shortages, such as they were the fault of Simon Stevens, the fault of the Chancellor of the Exchequer? It's not my fault. They blocked approvals. That's what Mr. Cummings told the committee. Is that true?
No, that is not a fair recollection of the situation. Now, getting hold of PPE was always a huge challenge. And as the National Audit Office have shown in their report into this when they went through all of the details, there was never a point at which NHS providers couldn't get access to PPE. But there were huge challenges. We first opened the stockpile of PPE that we had in the event of a pandemic. We opened that in January. We started buying new PPE in February. In March, China brought in export restrictions. And you'll remember at the time that there was a huge global demand for PPE. There were aeroplanes that were being turned around mid-flight. The European Union put out demands for PPE, calls for PPE that went entirely unanswered. We had to remove a piece of bureaucracy that was in the way that put a limit on the price that could be paid for PPE. And we took a policy decision that we should pay at the top of the market. That did require the Treasury to make that change. The Chancellor was incredibly helpful in driving that through, and we managed to get to this position where, despite local challenges, and I don't...
Hey, Truthway, thanks for joining. Would you ever debate a flat earther on stream? Yeah, for sure. For sure. I would love to do that. I love the idea of doing a debate on Twitch in general. Are you a flat earther? Is that what you're asking me?
Deny at all. There were challenges in individual areas. There was never a national shortage of PPE because of the action that we took.
Thank you. We'll come into more detail on that, but let me just check that I've understood correctly what you're saying. You were saying that there were blockages to the procurement of PPE. You requested, you objected to them, and you requested that they should be removed, and they were removed as a result of that.
That's correct. And also, I'll say this. I take and took and have taken throughout full responsibility for all of the areas that I'm responsible for. You know,
Viper, no problem. I hope you gain more. It's good to get real news from other places, especially when it's straight information. Thanks, man. Yeah, appreciate that. That's what I'm trying to do, is to just, you know, I try and keep up to date with these things. I don't have all the information, but that's kind of what I wanted to do on here, basically. You know, jump in and read along with me and watch along with me, and we can kind of learn it together, basically. When do you usually go live so I can catch you again? So generally, I am live usually around this time. So I guess that's, what did he say? So 3 a.m. for you, 8 a.m. for me. And then sometimes I do a late night reading of a book that I'm reading. And that is usually about 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock ish my time. Which would be, do a quick math here. that would be 5 p.m. your time, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, man, really appreciate you joining. And yeah, hopefully see you on the next stream, definitely. Really appreciate you joining. Yeah, Truthway, what's the situation with the flat earthing debate? Tell me more.
So the Chancellor played his part in resolving those blockages and getting them out of the way so we could buy PPE. And Sir Simon Stevens has worked incredibly hard throughout this crisis. You know, my whole approach has been that this is a team effort. You can't respond to a pandemic just by pointing fingers. You have to respond to a pandemic by bringing people together, trying to provide that leadership, by having a positive attitude to teamwork, because that's the only way through it.
Were you aware that Mr. Cummings then said that there was an investigation into whether there were blockages, and he alleges that investigation by the Cabinet Secretary concluded that there weren't?
Well, I can't recall that, but what I can recall, and I know for a fact, is that there was a cap on the price paid for PPE. Because the global price had shot up, we had to remove that cap. I requested its removal. It was removed. And after that, combined with bringing Lord Dighton in, who did a brilliant job in this area, we could buy PPE more easily. And we're now in the happy position where we've got huge amounts of PPE, and 70% of it, other than gloves, 70% of it is made on shore here in the UK.
But who is responsible?
Have a good one, Viper. Enjoy your day when it starts.
That cap.
Well, you'll have to go through the records, but that was a condition on the budget that we had for PPE. So it was set somewhere within the machine. I think it was a Treasury condition, which is why I went to the Chancellor. But I am pretty sure that the Chancellor was not aware of it until I raised it with him, because the moment I raised it with him, with the Prime Minister, he got into action and he got it removed.
So it was a Treasury condition, a Treasury block on your department, so you didn't have the unilateral authority to
no, but I'm not blaming the Treasury.
It's
absolutely standard practice that the Treasury puts in place conditions when you're given a big budget. We were given a multi-billion-pound budget for buying PPE. On the 11th of April, one of the conditions of that budget was that there was a cap put on the price that we paid. The problem is that that cap was set in terms of the market price, but the market moved upwards massively, so we had to remove that particular piece of bureaucracy. I asked the Chancellor to remove it, and he did very rapidly, and then we could buy at the top of the market, which was one of the reasons that we managed to resolve the challenges of getting PPE into the country.
Absolutely. To be clear, I'm just trying to establish the facts, given the allegation that was made, and given that this is a lessons learned inquiry. It may be that the fact that you had to change procurement policy may be a lesson for a response to an emergency, so it's an important point. And the third charge that Dominic Cummings specifically made orally against you was around testing in care homes. So specifically, did you tell the Prime Minister in March that people in hospitals would be tested before they went back into care homes?
We set out a policy that people would be tested when tests were available. And then I set about building the testing capacity to be able to deliver on that. We can go through it in more detail, and perhaps we will, the reasons for the clinical advice. So the clinical advice set out 3 different reasons why we took the approach that we did. And on care home policy throughout, we followed the clinical advice. And the challenge was not just that we didn't have the testing capacity, but also that the clinical advice was that a test on somebody who didn't have any symptoms could easily return a false negative and therefore give false assurance that that person didn't have the disease. That was the clinical advice. At the same time, the clinicians were worried, because it took 4 days to turn a test around, that if you...
So he's calling into question whether or not everyone should have been tested. So there you go, that's a sneaky little fucking tactic that he's employed there. You know, did you promise that everyone would be tested? Well, maybe everybody shouldn't be tested. Do you ever think about that one, guys? Let's put that out there, let's throw that one out there. He's kind of trying to mix it up here. He's throwing all kinds of shit around. I love the, I'm not aware of the dude's name that's asking these questions, but I think he gives a wry smile after Hancock starts saying this.
Didn't have the disease. That was the clinical advice.
To me.
At the same time, the clinicians were worried, because it took 4 days to turn a test around, that if you leave somebody in hospital in those 4 days, they might catch COVID and therefore go back to a care home with a negative test result, but having caught it. And so the advice was the most important thing was infection prevention control in care homes, and the evidence has shown that the strongest route of the virus into care homes, unfortunately, is community transmission, and so it was staff testing that was the most important thing for keeping people safe in care homes. And obviously, again, for that, we needed the testing capacity. So those are the reasons for the decisions that were taken. That's the clinical advice that we received. We accepted this clinical advice. But in relation to what I told the Prime Minister, of course, the relationship between the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister is often that I make commitments to do things, I get on and do them, and then they're delivered. That's how the relationship works, as you probably know.
I hate that kind of... Well, obviously, I hate that kind of bullshit. It never looks good. It never looks good. I don't know who falls for that kind of, oh, well, if he's laughing about it, then obviously it can't be that serious. He must be telling the truth. He couldn't be that confident. It's like a false show of confidence, especially when the dude looks nervous as fuck. Matt Hancock doesn't seem like he's obviously had political training, but he doesn't seem like he's feeling it. He's not living it. You've got to live it, Matt. You've got to say it with your heart, say it with your chest.
Indeed. So we'll come on, as you anticipated, in some more detail.
Say that again. I really hate that shit.
And then they're delivered. That's how the relationship works, as you probably know.
Indeed. So we'll come on, as you anticipated, in some more detail in the second section of this morning's evidence. But you've been very clear in your answer that what you told the Prime Minister was that people would be tested on discharge from hospital when tests were available. That was always clear in terms of what you said, and as far as you know, what was understood by the Prime Minister and others in Downing Street.
Well, I just take you to actually it's worth going to the precise language of the testimony that you were referring to, because that is in fact what was said, that people would be tested, and my job was to build that testing capacity and tested. And
that again. Sorry, got distracted.
That people would be tested, and my job was to build that testing capacity, and with the team, we absolutely did.
I understand. We'll, as I say, come into the policy questions and lessons learned during the rest of this morning. I wanted to get your response to those charges that were made. Is there anything you want to add as a right of reply to the oral evidence that you heard from Dominic Cummings?
Well, it is telling that no evidence has been provided yet, but there's a reason for that, I think, which is that throughout this, I have got out of bed every morning with the view and the attitude that my job is to do everything I could to protect lives and to get this country out of the pandemic. And I've approached that with a mission-driven determination to make it happen.
What a choice of words. What a hero, eh? I'm just going to go and grab a glass of water, so bear with me 1 second. Sorry about that. Gosh. Right. Let's get back in. Yeah, he's said a lot. He said a lot. He's fit a lot of words into this. It's not like Dominic Cummings is umming and ahhing. He's obviously got a lot of. It's hard to tell how much of it is pre-prepared, but a lot of it will be. I imagine he's rehearsed some of this, because you would, wouldn't you? To be fair. But he's fitting a lot in, and now comes this real emotional moment, and he's done this before already. I saw him do this. He did this the day of Cummings' attack. Hancock came out afterwards onto the podium and said, "This every day I go to work" speech. And I didn't buy it then. And I don't really buy it now, because the corruption, the sheer sleaze in the Johnson government is such that emotion was not the biggest driver of these decisions. It was money, it seems now, more than anything else. But we'll learn more about that as well as time goes on.
Which is that, throughout this, I have got out of bed every morning with the view and the attitude that my job is to do everything I could to protect lives and to get this country out of the pandemic. And I've approached that with a mission-driven determination to make it happen. And I've tried to do that with an approach of honesty and integrity, and critically answering questions both in public and in private to the best of my ability. Now, sometimes you have to say you don't know, because we're operating in a world where there's huge judgments being made with very imperfect information, often at great pace. But from the approach I've taken, not least in public and to Parliament and select committees like this one, and in private to the Prime Minister and everybody else, has been to be direct sometimes, yes, and I can be quite forceful when I'm trying to get something through if it needs to happen. But that's what you have to do, and crucially, you have to bring the team with you. There are a lot of people operating, doing the biggest job that they'd ever done in their lives, and you have to build confidence that people can go ahead and do what needs to be done, and then they're going to be supported in the judgments that they take. So we'll go through, no doubt, lots of difficult judgments that were made, and it's very...
That sounds like he's going to throw someone under the bus. that sounds like it's going to throw someone under the bus.
It's important that we learn the lessons of which of those judgments could have been improved. And indeed, like on care homes, we did manage to improve the system over time. But the attitude and the approach was always to be direct and as straightforward and honest as possible. So in a way, I welcome this opportunity to tell you the truth of what happened, given the discussion that there's been over the past couple of weeks.
And given that discussion, why do you think it was that Dominic Cummings chose to be quite so withering? Did you have a bad personal engagement over the times? Was it a sincere difference of policy view, whether policies or, as it were, sort of operational decisions? What's the origin of this?
Right, I'm trying to predict in my head. Will he go with how people say it in offices, in private businesses in the country, which is, I'm sure it's nothing personal, he made the decision and, or will he go with something that's very strategic? I think he's going to go with, in this particular instance, I think he's going to choose to not go with the creating more gossip angle. I think he's going to go with in these positions we make very difficult decisions and, it's very hard to blah, blah, blah. I think he's going to go with the objective, not a personal thing angle. See if I'm right.
Dispute.
I have no idea. I mean, I worked directly with the Prime Minister from the start of this, and of course I worked with his aides and his team as well, and I have no idea.
Did you know that he wanted the Prime Minister to fire you?
Yes, because he briefed the newspapers at the time.
Right.
Or somebody briefed the newspapers. I now have a better idea of who it was.
And did you raise an objection to that?
Yes, of course, and I had the Prime Minister's wholesome support all the way through.
And was that problematic in your discharge of your duties in Whitehall, that this was happening in the newspapers, in the public prints, but also reflecting discussions that were taking place in Downing Street?
Well, I think the best thing to say about this, and this will be corroborated by lots of people in government, the best thing to say is that government has operated better over the past 6 months.
I'll turn to Jeremy Hunt for the first
Best thing to say.
Thank you. Now this inquiry is about lessons learned for the future. So I just want to look in a bit of detail about the scientific advice that you received at the early stages of the pandemic. Test and trace is a very established key plank of our response now. But the original 4-point plan that was announced on the 13th of February last year, contain, delay, research, mitigate, said that community testing should be stopped after stage 1. And that's what happened 3 weeks later on March the 9th. In South Korea and Taiwan, we now know, test and trace was used right the way through the pandemic, and as it progressed, they scaled up their testing rather than scaled it down. So my first question is, when was the first time that you, as Secretary of State, were advised that South Korean-style test and trace was a potential option for controlling the...
So test and trace is one of the biggest failings of the UK government when it came to the coronavirus pandemic. It was a complete shit show when it did get going as well. Technologically, it was very flawed, and there wasn't a large take-up of it either when it did launch. The public campaign for test and trace was quite weak as well in many senses, and there wasn't a forceful message at all about the fact that it had to be used. Jeremy Hunt's point is here that in South Korea and Taiwan, it was fucking flawless, and they nailed it. And our government's position has always been, we've had that withering argument of you can't make international comparisons, which is bullshit, because why can't you make international comparisons? It's technology. Technology doesn't matter whether it's in South Korea or here. you can enact a test and trace system. You can learn from other countries. You can build it out. Anyway, I'm ranting, which is the point. But anyway, let's get back to it.
The pandemic in the UK.
Well, I will answer that, but just before I answer the direct question, I want to correct something in the question, which is that testing was at no point scaled down. On the contrary, we were driving up testing capacity all the way through. And if you look at the record of the testing numbers, we spent January devising the test.
I understand that, but community testing was stopped. That was the announcement that was made in Downing Street on March the 9th. So there was still testing going on in hospitals and some in care homes, but the community element, which is what carried on in South Korea and Taiwan and other places,
yes,
it was part of the strategy to stop that. And I'm just wondering at what point you were advised that different approach could be a sensible option for the UK.
Well, I thought that it could be a sensible option throughout, and this is what I was explaining. We were ramping up testing capacity all the way through, and at first in January, PHE devised the test, and we were one of the first countries in the world to devise an effective test. And then in February, we got that test up and running in practice, and we got to about 2,000 tests a day by the end of February. And then we multiplied that by 5 times over March. And in the middle of March, I took personal authority over the driving up of testing because it wasn't going fast enough. And what I'd say is that at the time, PHE were brilliant at the science and at the development, but simply hadn't had the experience or the capacity to scale. Now, this is important because what happened was that the growth in the demand for the tests for people who were symptomatic happened exponentially, whereas the growth in the testing, although very rapid, was in a straight line. And this meant that we had to prioritise the testing.
Yeah, I understand that argument. I'm really trying to talk about the advice you received. Now,
sure.
Dr. Jenny Harries was very clear. She said community testing was not an appropriate intervention. And she said that was the scientific advice that had been around for several weeks. Let's just have a look, because I really want to look at the exact...
Get that line again.
Scientific advice that... I'm really trying to talk about the advice you received. Now,
sure.
Dr. Jenny Harries was very clear. She said community testing was not an appropriate intervention. And she said that was the scientific advice that had been around for several weeks. Let's just have a look, because I really want to look at the exact evidence. The week before the big national lockdown was announced on the 23rd of March, Imperial published a paper, which was the modelling that they had done. And they had 2 options in that. One was what they called suppression, which was effectively a lockdown approach.
Yeah.
And the other was what they called mitigation,
yeah,
which was effectively allowing the virus to spread but protecting the most vulnerable people. So there was no South Korean test and trace option in that paper. It was either lockdown or let the virus spread.
Well, there is no country in the world that uses only testing and doesn't have some form of lockdown as well. And so absolutely what I was up for...
But there is South Korea. South Korea has not had a lockdown. And that's the question, this is really what I want to ask you. Why were you not advised that middle way, which would involve not stopping community testing as we announced on March the 9th, but actually expanding community testing, you weren't advised that in the run-up to the first lockdown as an option?
Well, I wasn't, but I'm also trying to explain that I think there's a couple of points in the premise of your question that are wrong. So the first is about capacity. Unlike other countries, we did not go into this with a testing capacity. So one of the reasons that we had to reduce the use of community testing is because we didn't have a big enough capacity and we had to target the testing at where it's clinically most needed. The second point, which is really important here, is that the clinical advice I received was that testing people asymptomatically would lead to false negatives. And in fact, there was a SAGE decision on this, SAGE advice, on the 28th of January saying that it would not be useful to test asymptomatic individuals. That advice was later changed. And in fact, maybe we can come on to a wider discussion about asymptomatic transmission, because that is a very, very significant part of what we have learned. But so the problem was, we were advised you shouldn't test people without symptoms because you will get a set of false negative results. And secondly, that when you only have a relatively small testing capacity compared to, say, Germany or South Korea, you have to target it at the people for whom it might be life-saving. So that's the basis on which
I understand. I'm not questioning that you followed the clinical and scientific advice. I accept that.
Yeah.
This area. I'm trying to understand what that advice was. And SAGE didn't model South Korean test and trace until April. They didn't actually discuss its impact until May. So I can't see any evidence in the papers that you or the Prime Minister were offered that South Korean style approach as an option at that first stage before the first lockdown was announced. I just want to check that is correct.
That is my recollection, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, we didn't know at the time, and a lot of this is Captain Hindsight, and but it's important to learn from Captain Hindsight because we might have pandemics in the future. We didn't know at the time that Korea and Taiwan were going to have some of the lowest death rates in the world. But we did know that Taiwan had experience of SARS, and Korea had experience of MERS. And being nearer China, they both had the cases of the pandemic before we did. So why do you think it took until May for SAGE to discuss the approach taken in Korea and Taiwan?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, let's just look at someone else that was a bit closer to us, who was also talking about the same kind of thing, which is Dr. Tedros at the World Health Organization. So he said on the 16th of March, so this is before our first lockdown, that test and trace needed to be escalated. At that time, Taiwan, Australia...
Seems ready. Hancock seems ready to pour some water over this one. That test and trace need to be ramped up. Yeah, go on, because I'm ready. That's where I'm feeling this kind of... I'm feeling a zinger coming out of this one. Let's see.
Australia, New Zealand, Korea, they'd already started closing their borders. They'd all kept their cases to below 2% of the population. Do you think we had a blind spot about what was happening in East Asia at that time? Because there doesn't seem to be any evidence that it was fully considered.
I think that there are a significant number of lessons from this. One is that my mistake. He didn't know what he's talking about. He's got fuck all. He's got nothing. All right, let's go back. I think that there are a significant number of lessons from this. One is that the need for a rapidly scalable testing operation must be part of pandemic preparedness, and this country did not have one. And if you think about the areas where we were strong in our response to the pandemic, they're areas where we had prior strengths. So the NHS response was very strong, built new hospitals, delivered care to everybody who needed it. The science response was very strong. We have a centuries-long science tradition. We didn't have a major diagnostics industry or capability. And the tracing and isolation system was essentially built for very important but very small outbreaks. As Health Secretary, you're dealing with these sorts of outbreaks all of the time. I'm currently dealing with a monkeypox outbreak and an outbreak of cases of drug-resistant TB, and that is absolutely standard. And the lack of that capability at the start meant that the options that we had were fewer.
But let's just look at what you did in April very successfully, which was ramp up testing capacity to 100,000 a day. That was a big change. If you had been advised in January or February, we're going to need more testing capacity if we want to go South Korea.
So I don't think that's...
And let's start this right away.
But we did. So we did. In January, I was driving the system to drive up testing capacity. In fact, in preparation for this meeting, I was looking at the minutes of one of our internal meetings on the 27th of January when I was calling for the driving up of testing capacity. And PHE's response was excellent on the science, but there was simply not the experience to drive up capacity. And so when we got to 2,000 a day by the end of February, and it was still rising, but by the middle of March, it was not rising fast enough. We were not doing enough to bring in the private sector capacity, so I took personal charge of it, and then a couple of weeks later set the 100,000 target. And that 100,000 target was essential in galvanising the whole system and building a diagnostics.
So what changed? What changed at the start of March that suddenly his target was realistic?
Organisation and ecosystem in this country, and now we do about 6 million tests.
And that was a very important step in our pandemic response. But the strategy at the time was clear that when we got through stage 1, community testing would stop. Now, on the 16th of March, when Dr. Tedros said we needed to test, it was a week after we'd stopped community testing. Did you challenge officials and say, why do we appear to be doing something that is completely different to what the World Health Organization is advising?
I entirely agreed with Dr. Tedros at that point. And the challenge, though, was the scale of the capacity. And I'd driven that as hard as I could within PHE, with my indirect, therefore, hands on the levers, and then in the middle of March we had a...
That's an interesting way of putting that. Indirect hands on levers. Looking out for a lot of political language, and I've got to hand it to him. It hasn't been, and maybe this is because in my mind I'm comparing it to Johnson, it hasn't been that squirrely. He's not weaseled out of a lot of questions yet. He's actually answering questions. But this kind of indirect hands-on lever. Anyway, I'll let him speak. I'm talking bullshit over it too much. Let's get back into it.
And I'd driven that as hard as I could within PHE, with my indirect, therefore, hands on the levers. And then in the middle of March we had a meeting. I remember it very clearly. We had a meeting in Downing Street at which we had an array of the test providers. We had the PHE team who were doing that, the testing, and I took personal charge of the testing project.
I know you wanted to expand the capacity. I'm just trying to understand the strategy.
Yeah.
So you confirmed that you weren't offered South Korean style test and trace as an option,
as far as I can remember,
in the run up to the 23rd of March. Did you ever ask SAGE to analyse what was going on and do the modelling for
Yes, and in fact
for South Korean style test and trace?
Yes, and I had calls with South Korean ministers myself in order to understand what they were doing.
So why did that modelling not happen until April, and why were there no discussions till May? Because this could have been a big emergency.
Essentially because of a lack of capacity.
I'm talking about discussions in SAGE. I understand the lack of capacity was a problem, but in terms of the strategy, SAGE didn't discuss this until May. If you requested them to look at it earlier, why did it take that time?
Well, I'm not sure that I did directly. What I was doing was asking around.
So he looked at it, he saw it was going well, he had a conversation with officials in South Korea about how well it was going, and then he came back to his desk and he didn't tell anyone. Fucking fishy, mate.
Around the world for who's got the best response. But all of these questions are predicated on the idea that we simply could have had more tests. We couldn't. I drove the system as hard as I could, including having to go in and essentially become, take executive authority over delivering it, and then we brought in Dido to pick that up because it was such an enormous task.
Okay, I just need to ask you one question similar to what Greg asked you about Dominic Cummings' allegations, which again we have to stress he didn't substantiate when we asked him to, but I just want
that last answer again. because that to me is the key one. If he knew about it, why didn't he tell everyone? Why isn't he running through the hallways of Downing Street saying, let's do what South Korea's doing?
Predicated on the...
Hang on, let's go back.
What I was doing was asking around the world for who's got the best response. But all of these questions are predicated on the idea that we simply could have had more tests. We couldn't. We drove the system. I drove the system as hard as I could, including having to go in and essentially become, take executive authority over delivering it. And then we brought in Dido to pick that up because it was such an enormous task.
And it was a shit show, and Dido did pick it up. That's another story. This thing about running around the world, seeing who's got the best response, implies so much effort, where really the information is right there for you. Like Hunt said, SARS, MERS, South Korea, Taiwan, it's all there. It works. He's acting like this is some revelation, like South Korea ministers giving him a TED talk on how to handle a pandemic. It's happened before. But anyway, he's got away with that one. What's his next question? I'm going to be jumping off soon, folks. When I come back on, I'm going to be digging straight back into this because this is fucking juicy. I didn't think it'd be this good, but it really is. And I'm very much enjoying shouting about it. So, yeah. Hope you are too.
Okay, I just need to ask you one question similar to what Greg asked you about Dominic Cummings' allegations, which again we have to stress he didn't substantiate when we asked him to, but I do want to give you a chance to comment on the record. He said that you used the whole "we are following the science" line as a way that meant that you could always say, well, if things go wrong, we'll blame the scientists and it's not my fault. And he said he saw you discuss that with the Prime Minister. Is that true?
I don't think so, no. And I'll tell you why. And we discussed it at the Select Committee before. My approach throughout has been that we are guided by the science. I try not to say that we follow the science. There are examples where ministers make decisions.
Oh. So it's been asked, did you come up with a strategy for throwing the scientists under the bus? And he said, I don't think so. You're pretty sure if that was your logic, and that's twisted logic, to say that, we'll say follow the science, so, if they start blaming it, we'll go, oh no, it was the scientists. That's a twisted logic. How could you not remember if that was your philosophy?
Different to the scientific advice. One example is that when we brought back people from Wuhan in January, I was advised that they should be asked to go home and isolate. And I said, no, they need to quarantine. And we used the NHS facility at Arrow Park on Merseyside, you'll remember, and we took people directly from the planes and put them in Arrow Park and made sure that they were quarantined. Now, that is an example of the scientific advice saying you can be more relaxed about things and me being tougher. Now, when it comes to the decisions around lockdown, we did accept and implement the scientific advice, and I'm sure we'll come on to that, the early March period. But I take full responsibility for the decisions that not only that I take, but that are taken in my name as Secretary of State across the health family and the NHS, Public Health England, in the department. And I know the Prime Minister feels very strongly the same. But of course you're guided by the science.
So just looking forward, my last question on this area, how do we improve the quality and the diversity of the advice going to ministers from SAGE and the scientists in the future? Do you think there would be merit, for example, in a pandemic situation rather than normal times, in publishing that advice immediately so that you get the benefit of instant peer review from the entire scientific community?
Yes, and now thankfully we do publish the evidence now and the minutes of those meetings. And I think that the public debate around this is generally healthy.
Thank you.
Right. So that's fascinating already. He's already got quite a grilling. And it's the grilling that you would expect, although I thought it'd be more focused on the questions that Cummings asked. Although, no, actually, your first man there it was mostly Cummings, his questions. Jeremy Hunt was much more, he seems like he's already trying to tie him in knots. Hunt's being a bit more strategic. It is good cop, bad cop. I felt myself sliding towards that analogy, and there it is. Hunt being the bad cop. Hancock's already said some crucial shit, like, I didn't lean on the scientists so that I could throw them under the bus, and I didn't lie to the Prime Minister. He said no to that. Not, I don't recall, he said no. And that alone is on the record now. Right, I'm going to jump off. Next time I'm back on, I think I'm going to be focusing on this and continuing to hear his answers, Hancock's answers to the Select Committee, giving evidence on the government's coronavirus response. Cheers for joining me. Shout out to Viper for the follow, and see y'all on the next stream, hopefully. Take it easy.